Alrighty, so I'm back at it again with another video, this time doing something a little experimental. Within Standard, as the league just ended, and this is a Glacial Cascade Occultist. Very, very rough, but this is about just kind of exploring some concepts. What are those concepts? Well, the concepts of figuring out what can kill you and why it kills you. So first off, you'll notice that we have Mage Blood Flask, and this is being tested with the Mage Blood. The rest of the gear is horrible. But this is essentially just used to cap resistances. I understand that there is a less damage taken multiplier on the elemental resistance flasks. And then we have a Jade Flask, but our evasion's nothing special, as we haven't invested too much into it. So I think I pulled it up at some point. It's like 12,000 or so nothing too crazy there. It's just to give us kind of some form of defense. Again, this is for testing purposes. The reason why I'm not too concerned about the less damage taken from the elemental flasks is because the build in mind would actually have a lot more HP. And again, this was me just cobbling together some gear that I had in stashes. So what are we actually testing here? We are testing clear, damage, and damage taken. So definitely something I'm going to be on the lookout for when they change the Arch Nemesis mod, so there we got 13,000 evasion, is what power they're going to have in terms of killing us, right? And identifying how we're going to be dying. And you're going to see at some point in the video I'm going to die to a ton of chaos damage bolts, right? But otherwise, we're taking damage, but it's overall not too bad. Might even be right here. Nope, not yet. Okay. But anyway, we're taking a lot of damage from that, kind of foreshadowing for the future. So, as you can notice, the clear is actually pretty decent. The AoE on the Cascade isn't that big, but because of Occultist Explosions, which is getting buffed next patch, and then Herald of Ice, it's a surprising amount of clear, and you'll be surprised, because I'm going to jump into the POE after, of how little damage is on this build. And where, like, you know, in relation to where it should be for its gear level. So basically this is kind of like purposely sandbagged to show essentially like what's actually needed for clearing, and also how POB, you know, it's important to know certain mechanics for skills, because when I was looking at Glacial Cascade, I was looking at the damage and I was like, it seems kind of low and such. But I didn't take into account double and triple hitting from the Cascade, which is very, very important and adds a lot more damage. There we go. There's the death to chaos damage, right? So like for next patch, and the chaos res is not that good on this character. I think it's 22%, something like that. Negative 22%, right? So totally, you know, fair dying there, right? But that's something there, like, although that seems obvious, right? Like, oh, clearly you got shot by a ton of chaos bolts, right? That could be cold, fire, lightning, whatever, right? So in the new patch, it's important to identify what's killing you, because the newly rebalanced modifiers might be slated, you know, whatever which way, right? Either towards the player, you know, maybe they're going to be really easy next patch, or maybe they're going to be really hard, right? We don't know. From the live stream, they look really promising, but they, you know, who knows, right? So anyway, so what we're testing here is kind of the amount of damage we want to output while still keeping as much tankiness as possible. Now you'll notice I have Grace on. I don't have Hatred on, which is a fantastic aura for this build. I think it adds about 50% more damage in POB, just about. I think a little under, maybe like 45%. And you say, well, how do you give that up? I would love to, you know, use it on this build, and I would definitely been using it during testing because I've been swapping in and out gems, etc. But the tankiness of Grace allows us to survive a little bit longer here. And you notice how these kind of bolts coming in and everything, we're manually dodging, you know, but we're also tanking a decent amount too. You know, and that's not something that's negated by Mage Blood there, right? Especially with these chaos damage hits, or physical for that matter. And being able to dodge those consistently is very, very important, because let's say you have 50% evade chance, which is surprisingly actually easy to reach, you know, with just some Flask and a Grace Aura. Then if you got 50% evade chance, then that means that your effective HP is doubled, in a sense, right? Against the attacks, which is massive. On top of that, Vol Grace is a fantastic active ability. It gives you, I think it's 15% flat evade chance, right? Which means, you know, you just have it. And that can help you get to the 90% cap temporarily. And the Suppression. Let's talk about Suppression. This build doesn't have much, but I'd love to put some on here, because the power of Suppression is very, very potent, especially against bosses, and obviously, of course, spell-based characters, which usually bosses are, not always. But it can help against things like the map. See these fireballs coming in, etc., right? I'm not sure if they're classified as was I gonna say as attacks or spells, but I would assume those are spells. The reason why I say that is because some attacks, kind of like the Chaos Bolts there, I think are classified as attacks, even though they kind of look chaosy and poisony. I think it kind of depends on the ability. So the fireballs being fireballs or spells, and that would mean we're taking half damage if you have Suppress Cap. And that's better than a Mage Blood Flask, right? So you go like, oh, we have 40% or 39% less damage taken from Elemental. Well, yeah, but if you cap Suppression, you have 50%. And you have open Flask slots, right? And you'd be capping Elemental res through gear anyway. That's not to say that Mage Blood isn't powerful. Of course it is. This is just a matter of saying, showing how scuffed this is and what in reality what this would look like. So, again, the clear being really, really good is awesome. In terms of the single target, you'll see it's kind of low, right? And that's the biggest thing on this, right? Is to show how things like Herald of Ice, Profane Bloom can really skew your damage and clear and actually give you a lot more power than you think, and then allows you to focus on just single target, which is very, very nice. So power of clear stuff has been covered. Power of defense has also been covered as well, and especially identifying two weaknesses. Like identifies the different, what's going to kill you, etc., right? But the final thing I want to go over is situational swapping. Now, I don't recommend this, and I think most people don't do this, but you will see the racers do it, and this is done much more and elegantly, and probably wouldn't be done on a map-by-map basis, but they do it for the bosses and such, right? And that's why I kind of still have these flasks on, is and kind of as a reminder to me, is because they'll actually swap Flask into, like, let's say like a Ruby Flask, right, for the Syrian Exarch, or a Topaz Flask for the Eater of Worlds. Not always, and I'm not saying it's a mandatory thing, but it is a little tech that you could do in order to make the boss fight a lot easier. I remember doing the Black Star last league, and I tried it for myself, and it was crazy. I would, pop my Ruby Flask, and all of a sudden, all the fire damage attacks for spells were like, wait a minute, that deals a ton less. So even with just 20% less damage taken, that can help a lot. Things like Arctic Armor as well in that fight can help too. And you can get to the point where you're actually just face tanking a lot of things, even on a supposedly squishy character like a mage, right? And actually, this is funny. This is a big montage of the horrible single target that we have here, but I'm leaving all this footage in because, again, it's all for testing purposes, right? This isn't meant to be a build showcase or anything. This is all testing. But what is important out of all that is your situational awareness and what you're choosing to put in your build. So you probably wouldn't do this map by map, right? You wouldn't be changing out, your different gear slots, auras, etc., right? But it's important to find what's best for you. Because, in this case, we were running, Grace for most of the map, and now you'll notice I've swapped to Hatred, right? Gain a big damage multiplier, right? Because I'm like, oh, I don't really need the evasion here against this boss, And again, that's not something I recommend that you do. It's just something interesting to experiment with, because if I were to run Hatred in that map, I can guarantee you, yeah, I do more damage, and sure, the thing would die faster, but if I can't evade those initial couple attacks or survive, then I'm toast. So, granted, there are people obviously who play without the, defensive layers and such, and I think that's fine, because there is definitely a portion of, if you do more damage, and this is a perfect example, right, for a single target, if I did 4 times the damage, this whole portaling in and out wouldn't be a problem. I would just kill the boss, be done with it. So, really, really important to keep that in mind. That damage is still, of course, king if you can get a ton of it. It's just important to recognize some different defensive layers and really what your build needs. So notice as well, like, this build doesn't have any like armor, right? Besides like Arctic Armor, which I don't think is enabled at the moment, and definitely was not enabled during mapping. We had a Herald of Ice set up, so that's an example of, maybe the build does need physical damage reduction. You could set that up, maybe get like Tukahama Pantheon, things like that, and actually get some physical damage reduction, right? Determination. You could go for armor bases. You could do conversion, like physical taken as fire, whatever you want to do, right? You could do block variations, right? Again, these are things just to think about of how to potentially get tankier. We also don't have things like Leech, right? Some kind of maybe a life gain on hit or something like that, like a Vitality Watcher's Eye, right? Legion Jewels, like a Corrupted Soul. Again, lots of stuff to think about. And just kind of finding the defensive and I'm including offensive as well, layers are very, very important for how to scale your damage. So that's kind of the overall wrap. I'm now going to swap over to the POB stuff, and kind of go over like how like unoptimized the build really is, but also kind of show to like what kind of damage you need, because again, this is a tier 13 map, rare. The mods are, you know, hey, everything's faster. You know, they have a chance to avoid ailments like our chill. And then on top of that too, they suppress damage, which were spell-based builds. So actually that's kind of impactful, right? Makes them a lot tankier, right? So 68% of the time they're taking half damage from us, which is quite high. That kind of leads to the shenanigans here of the boss being pretty tanky, but not to blame it on that, is again, the build's poorly unoptimized, damage is low, all that stuff, right? But again, keep this in mind here, right? How not great this looks here. And we're going to now jump into POB and show how much better it can get. All right, so this is going to be going over the POB. As you can see, low amount of damage. Medial off the bat, 362,000, but we do shotgun, so initial bursts do help out there, right? We can get an extra 1 or 2 or so according to the wiki. I generally find probably about 1 is pretty easy to get, like an additional overlap, so it hits twice, or up to additional 2 if I'm lucky. But again, that's just kind of filling things out. No more than that, though. There's no way. The clear is carried by the Herald of Ice, and the Occultist Ascendancy for Profane Bloom, which is getting again buffed. So we take those. Tree is, you know, quite simple, or, you know, just pathing around. No crazy clusters, none in fact, and it's just the baseline tree. It does have the Mageblood setup, as you can see. Keep in mind our evasion rating, right, before we switch to the other POB. 13,000 here, okay? Gear is very simple. Okay, just kind of scrolling over it quickly here. You can pause if you need to. But you'll notice our life, 178%, but a total of 3.6k. That's because, again, on these pieces of gear, not much at all in terms of flat life rolls. Again, the gear's pretty horrible. But we have a high percent increased, which is good. At least we have that, right? So our clear is actually pretty decent. Our chaos res is negative. As you saw, we died to chaos and took quite a bit of damage from it. And if we had more damage, that boss would have been easier. Clear would have been technically better, right? But if we were also tankier, then we could have more time to actually pull off, you know, damage, right? And although elemental Mageblood Flasks are useful, we have a much better setup in store. Beat the new POB. More evasion, no Mageblood. But how is such a thing possible? Bases. Things like Grace are very, very effective that we run on both, right? Here's our Grace here, and that gives us a lot of evasion, but it also gives more evasion rating, which is then multiplied by things like Flasks, right? If you have like increased evasion rating or increased evasion rating on your tree. And on the tree, although, as you'll see, none is taken, right? But if you had that, you get a much bigger multiplier. So where do we go from here? What's so different? Recoup. Cast speed with Intensify adds additional damage, that alone, and then some other points scattered here and there. But the tree is pretty much the same. Life. Almost 1,400 more. I'd actually say roughly, yeah, 1,400 more. More than that, right? Somewhere around there. Yeah, more than that, right? Where does that come from? Simple rares. Max life on body armor, etc. Gauntlets. And these aren't crazy rolls either, right? But we're switching to evasion armor pieces and getting that suppression. These could also be full evasion if you so wish. These rings, although you go, oh, but they're Elrion jewelry, right? That's fine. Just remove the Elrion portion and take off your device. And it's fixed. Build still clears just fine. You have Occultist Pops, which is getting buffed next patch. No problem at all. Once you get those in, boop, check it back on. Now your clear is even more insane. Not really much of a problem. Life and resist gear. Very simple. Eternal Struggle, tons of these by the way. You'll see I removed why it looks so funky with the strength, and I did this on both of them. Because on this I wanted to remove the implicits. On the other one I actually had like cold penetration, but on this I removed that. So, you know, you get a much better one. Okay. Tons of these on the market usually. Find the implicits you like, anoint it, call it a day. Okay. We'll take a look too. We do have an enchant, right? On this. Nice little damage multiplier. No boot enchant though, that could help a lot. But the idea is that something like this is very cheap because not a lot of people play this. So consider the skill you're playing and think about the economic repercussions, right, of you playing that skill and what you'll have to invest into it, right? For the most part, I'd say for most skills, you can do a pretty good job of budgeting it around and trying to find pretty good gear. It's just about being smart of where you put your money. Now, as you can see, our big number is a suppression chance, 100%. 100%. That means that all of these spells coming in are getting reduced by 50%, which is huge, right? Or excuse me, yes, 50%. So it's like a better Mageblood Flask, right, in a sense. This means that coupled with proper Chaos Res, because now we're running an Amethyst Flask as well, we're actually looking pretty good on the defense side, right? Now you may say, oh, but the effective hit pool, what's going on there? Well, it's not calculating suppression, at least to my knowledge in this case, right? You may say, well, how do I, what happens if I start removing stuff, right? Well, here's what it's kind of doing here, right? And as you can kind of take a look. It's calculating it, but it also has to do an additional average, right? So that's very, very important because on our other setup, right, with Mageblood, Fizz max hit is 6k because we have nothing, not as much to deal with that. Whereas on something like this, we would have the suppression against a physical damage spell. So the numbers are important, but again, this is obviously a fraction of the price. So all of a sudden now we're doing twice as much damage, almost. And on top of that as well, we're a decent amount tankier, right? You could say, oh, we're roughly the same for elemental max hit, but you're smoothing it out a lot more, plus the recovery from instinct, right? You're 10 levels higher, sure, right? But the gear is a fraction of the price. And you have a bit of block in there too, much more than the staff, okay? Watcher's Eye in here for extra suppression. Obviously, you could change the sound still at 90%, still be fantastic. Now, why I kind of show these two POBs is not necessarily for you to run out and play it, but, play this build or anything. This isn't a build guide. It's more for you to kind of take a look and realize, what strengths and weaknesses a build may have, and how do you go about fixing such things for, better budgets, better cost, and see what your build really needs. If I went ahead and just went, oh man, I died to those chaos damage mobs and then left it at that, I don't improve my build. If I kind of re-engineer, think about my build, say, hey, how can I sneak in some more chaos res? Maybe I would have needed to path all the way over here and get one with evil, right? Maybe I need to anoint this. I don't know. That might help out a lot. Do I need to increase my suppression? Do I need to, completely chop this right side of the tree off and start blocking more? Do I need to cluster jewel out here and just get additional damage? Is that the problem? Do I need small clusters, mediums, larges? What do I need? Jewels, threshold jewels, lots of things to think about. Gear. So just be mindful of that. As you're upgrading your build to the new league, think about the content you're facing and think about ways in order to mitigate it, right? Offensively and defensively. Okay? So again, now take this POB, put it into that map, right? We're overall decently tankier, right? And our damage is much higher. So our clear that's already good goes up by an insane amount. And the boss damage is actually now feasible. And this is on a tier 13 map with very little budget, right? Let that kind of sink in. And that's what I'm going to leave you with. Good luck in the next league. Might make another video before then, but we'll have to see. If not, then yeah, good luck and see you guys later. Peace.